Viewers, you are welcome to Eyewitness, your favorite program that has conversations with very important Nigerians. That is to say, Nigerians who have made significant contribution to the public good, to public discourse, to the public interest, and to community life. Our objective, as you know in this program, is to go away from the normal description of Nigerians as people who are always corrupt, who are focused on self-interest, and who are engaged in self-aggrandizement. We try to make the argument that there are many Nigerians whose commitment is to public good, and that those Nigerians should begin to have voice in our society. Our topic today is the crisis in the power industry and the role of regulation in ensuring that Nigerians have access to the electricity they deserve. The fact of the matter is that Nigeria's power industry has been in crisis for over 4 decades, and no government seems to be able to address that crisis. Yet, there is a regulatory agency that's supposed to make sure that institution works in the interest of the people. Why has that regulatory agency not been able to do its work? These are some of the issues we'll be addressing with our guest today. Our guest is Dr. Sam Amadi, a lawyer, somebody who has also served in government, has worked in the power regulatory agency, is a public commentator, is a politician, is a civil society activist. Dr. Amadi, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Jibo.
That's a huge list of titles you have, isn't it?
Well, I don't know whether if you're political, I'm political. If you're not, I'm not.
I'm not political,
Then
so
I'm
you
not
are not.
I'm
Okay,
not.
so we agreed on that.
Okay.
Our viewers want to know who you are. Where were you born? Where did you go to primary school, secondary school?
Okay, that's fine. My name, like I said, I'm Sam Amadi, born in a rural community in what is now Uyo in Akwa Ibom. Then used to be in eastern Nigeria, a central state rather, when I was born in the very late 1967. So I went to school, primary school, in what is now Abakaliki, Anambra State. Sorry, Ebonyi State. It used to be under the old central state. Uyo, Akwa Ibom was in eastern region and then later became a different state. Okay, so I went to primary school in a place called Obugoban Primary School in Anambra. Then we were one state, and my father was a civil servant with Ministry of Works and Transport. And typical of civil servants, we keep moving up and down. So when the IMO was created, we moved back to Owerri, and I went to secondary school. My uncle's secondary school then called Owerri Grammar School. My uncle, Dr. Bassett Nanukebu, a First Republic politician, built a good school in our village. So I went to school there and finished my, then we used to do 5 years. So before, I think we probably were one of the last percent before the 6 years curriculum came in. And then I went to first University of Sokoto to study philosophy, left to Calabar to study law. And today, a lawyer, I don't know whether I'm a lawyer or I'm a social scientist or economist or just an activist or just a public intellectual. But that's the brief background of my education. And then, of course, from Calabar, I practiced law briefly before going to Harvard for my other graduate degrees.
You were born just at the beginning of the Civil War. Do you have any memories of the war and its immediate aftermath?
Yeah. One of the memories I have is the fact that when I was young, when I was born, then I think 67, the war had just started, and then our community was almost under control by the federal troops. My parents recollected that I was very stubborn as a young person. So in our compound, the federal troop had taken over the community, and they were using some part of the house as where they were staying. And then each time, because I was very stubborn, they would take me and they threatened that they would cut my head and put radio. We used to think that radio was human beings speaking radio. See that person speaking there, they put my head there. So one of the evenings, according to the story, small boy, I had to put things together and climb to the window and run away. And they named me Okpoka. Now, everybody in the village doesn't know Sam Amadi. They know if you say you want to look for Okpoka. And Okpoka was this very courageous Biafran soldier who, urban legend has that he single-handedly destroyed the federal government ferret then in those days. So it became my name. And I was very stubborn and troublesome until secondary school when I course corrected myself and became as gentle as dove, as you can see me now. So I used to be very stubborn.
But why do a lot of people think you are still a radical?
Well, intellectually, yes, but physically, and I'm not breaking things, I'm not fighting. Those days I used to block girls from the village going to the stream and declare a free day of no fetching of water from the stream. But when they see me, they say, oh, well, I had some transformation, and then I changed. So for me, the Civil War is a story. I didn't have a picture of childhood because it was all lost. My parents now had to leave the house and move to Mbisi land, where we are in the refugee. So I came without pictures, memory of childhood, because nowhere to take picture. Secondly, my parents said I had kwashoko, like every other child then, and that accounts for why I'm not looking handsome anymore, because the stomach keep bulging because of after effect of kwashoko.
Well, that was a tragedy. So many Nigerians suffered at that time. You must have made a strategic mistake abandoning philosophy for law.
Yeah, okay, interesting, because when I signed for philosophy, my uncle then, Nanukebu, told me that philosophy is an ancient craft. He said that in law, I will encounter philosophy. So it's better for me that he said that philosophy was, Aristotle and Socrates could do philosophizing because there was, the economy supported intellectual work of that type. That in the modern economy, you have to be a professional, but you can encounter philosophy. So when I left and did law, and then when I got to Harvard, interestingly, and I encountered philosophy again. So in my doctorate, I focused mostly on political philosophy, Rawls, Habermas, Locke, and Hobbes. So I chose my courses, and that's maybe because of the way the schools run abroad. I was able to choose my field: political philosophy, divinity, law, and then look at the whole question of religion, freedom of religion, and liberal theory. So I now discovered that really my interest and disposition is towards philosophy, especially political philosophy. And so in my legal research, I do more of constitutional law, jurisprudence. Of course, I majored in jurisprudence and legal theory in my discipline, and then had field specialization in political philosophy and divinity. So I go back to the fact that philosophy is actually the bedrock, forms the real theoretical knowledge about any field. But maybe in a mercantilist world, maybe my uncle was right that I should do law and maybe I will encounter philosophy. Yeah. I still feel probably maybe if I had finished philosophy and gone to do law, maybe I have got a better handle on legal theory. But I'm doing okay. I'm trying to make up for the missed opportunity, as you say.
People who are really deep into philosophy are never religious because they ask too many questions. How do you combine the two in your life?
Very interesting, because that's a good point. When I was proposing my doctoral research, I said I was trying to show through philosophical tradition that the Judeo-Christian ethics is plausible, or at least demonstrable. And so my philosophy was, my professor said, how can I reconcile Plato and Aristotle? I said, I am a Platonian because I believe in essence and ideas that exist pre-phenomena. But first, I subject my faith to analysis. And I know that philosophy is about asking questions, but also philosophy recognizes that there are different modes of knowing, rationality, empiricism, also metaphysics, which is itself a branch of philosophy, even though these days generally discounted because of the change that empiricism, rationalism has, the damage or the change has brought to philosophy. But essentially, metaphysics still holds strong. And there are also philosophers who have maintained strong religious faiths, but of course, it doesn't mean that you'll be able to convince people to believe, but at least you'll be able to justify to yourself that their belief is not philosophical nonsensical. It has philosophical support, but then you're not believing because philosophy convinces you to believe.
Yeah.
But philosophy helps you to verify that your belief is defensible and reasonable.
Well, I took the liberty to ask you that question because you often talk about religion.
No, I'm deeply theological.
Facebook
Yeah,
page.
I agree. Yeah.
Okay, let's now come to the topic of today, the power sector. Maybe where we could start is that when President Jonathan privatized the power sector, the days of lack of power were supposed to have ended and things were supposed to move smoothly. And the comparison people made was, see what happened when telephones were privatized, it started working. Power sector was privatized, it didn't work. Why?
Well, very interesting starting point. For two reasons. One is, like Nigerians typically say, or people usually say, comparing apple and oranges, okay? Or now grape and oranges, whichever one. Telecom is, what we did in telecom was liberalization, not less privatization. Of course, we tried to privatize Nitel with Pentascope. It failed under Erufai. We tried with Entel, partial success. What worked was we liberalized the sector, which basically meant the federal government decided to release their monopoly control. And because telecom is about auctioning of spectrum, so what government did was to say, you know what, bid, everybody bid, come and take space, roll out their services. Some cost was less. You didn't need to run any network around. So if then it was V-Mobile, I think those guys and MTN and then V-Mobile came, they bidded. They paid for spectrum. They roll out service. Second, so it's easy. It's not sticky. It's not embedded, unlike electricity that is embedded. You have to, if you say, okay, I want to sell NEPA, Abuja Disconnect to Dr. Jibo. Dr. Jibo is going to ask you for how will he get the gas. You have to guarantee him that gas. You have to guarantee Dr. Jibo that the lines he's going to build will go through, nobody will block him. So, different transactions. So what government did, and easy to do, was to pull out of the structure, auction people, allow them, charge their market fee. Then competition, which is really the thing here, competition created new market entrants. When they saw that it's profitable, they can improve the service, they can reduce the charge. So it's a competitive sector of the market that is easy to privatize or liberalize. The second thing that worked was there was little expectation. There was no public expectation that, look, I remember when it was privatized, when MTN, V-Mobile, I didn't have any phone until even when I was about to travel to the country, I bought phone for my wife. That number I keep using. So if you like, you buy more phone. If you don't like, you don't buy. Nobody's going to protest that they don't have access to pay SIM. SIM was expensive. Then suddenly it has now dropped to almost free. They give you a SIM card free, and you are on. But power, there are connected homes. So when you say you are privatized, are you going to cut off those people and stop giving them power because they're able to pay the so it requires a different kind of business organization and structure. So the reason why we failed, because that's what it is that poor diagnosis of what the problem is. If you look at the National Electric Power Policy, which was done in 2000 to 2001 under Obasanjo when Atiku was vice president, the National Council of Privatization summed up the primary sector as public ownership. That public ownership meant that they didn't have enough financing for improvement of network. It was not commercially run, and so on and so forth. So they prescribed 3 major policy options. One is first unbundling, break it up. Disco, Genco, we unbundle it, liberalize, allow private people to come into generation if they can generate it. But in the meantime, keep distribution as a monopoly because you can't create multiple lines. And thirdly, they said privatize down the line. So no problem with these plans, but the problem was implementation. So first, there was a sense in which the government of Jonathan and subsequent governments felt that privatizing was the only viable option. So they went straight to privatize. And I attribute it to 3 factors. One is the global economic environment at that time, the neoliberal market idea that government can't do anything, which, well, from experience, government has failed in many ways. The second is the policymakers themselves were actors in that industry, like Martin Nagy, who was a minister when we had the most, fastest movement towards free electricity market. So there was this sense that they need to sell the assets quickly. We didn't pay attention to some of the conditions that were there. One is corporatization. So what I mean that by 2005, when the act was, and NEPA was then put into PSN, Power Holding Company, none of those entities had a competent board that was independent. They didn't have corporate governance. In fact, up to now, TCN doesn't have even a competent board that's independent board, run like a company. So if you had corporatized properly and commercialized, so you start building up institutional knowledge, competencies, then you set up your regulator. Then gradually you unbundle, new entities are coming to the generation. They start, any of these companies can decide to sell, just like they're doing now. A few of the companies can decide to go private. So the idea was just, the President Roadmap on Power was focused so much on sales. I went all over the world. The World Bank advised too that you won't be able to sell, there's no market, deep financial market to buy all Nigeria 11 discos at a time. In fact, they told us that they are doubtful if we will sell more than 2. But we were surprised that we sold, and they were shocked. It happened that we sold to people who didn't have the capacity in the long term to get it to work. So, to sum it up, I think 2 things worked wrongly with us. One was modeling. It was a wrong model. Egypt is now planning to privatize over a long period of time. They started with commercializing, making sure the tariff is good enough. The 10,000 megawatts Egypt, or 20,000 megawatts they harvested a few months ago, is a public sector project. So they have tried to build up capacity, availability before they start going to the private market. South Africa, that has about 50,000 or thereabout megawatts for 50 million people or thereabout, is still publicly owned. Eskom, yeah, of South Africa. Still publicly owned, but they want to privatize because, so most countries that privatize, Chile, UK, all those countries privatize when the need was how to create more efficiency, value for money. So government pulls back from public financing, reduce public sector borrowing requirement, allow private sector, not when to create a product. So it's difficult for a country that had, by 2000, average supply was 2,000 megawatts, basically, 2005, before the reform started.
Yeah.
If you are in that situation, it's difficult. It's not too wise to expect a private market to crowdsource for you 10,000 megawatts when even your market fundamentals are not very good. So the risks are very high. The cost of money is very high. We've not had a history of consistent policy making. Thank God there has not been major reversal now since 2010 when they started. Nobody has reversed. Yar'Adua was the one who delayed and stopped small. Jonathan started, continued. Buhari has continued generally without reversing. So if you are doing this privatization today, if they had allowed NEC to work and all this process to concentrate on the commercial improvement and corporate governance, maybe now you'll be thinking about, out of that 5, maybe 3 can go. Eko, Ikeja, some of the very strong ones, maybe Ibadan, depending on capacity, they can first go to the private sector market. Whether this was, and one thing we learned when we were in NEC was that when Yola was dropped.
Maybe you should first tell our viewers what is NEC, what its role is, and why it got it right, where it got it wrong.
NEC is Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission that was created under the Electric Power Sector Act as the sole regulator of that sector. Its work is basically threefold: economic regulation, which is set prices, determine what anybody earns or pays in the sector. 2, technical regulation, certify networks, meters, show that the network, and then license producers and all entities. And then thirdly, social, protect consumer, environment, health and safety. Now, the regulator is not the one who makes the policy. The policy to privatize was made at the level of Ministry of Power and the Presidency. The regulator's work is to manage the market based on the regulatory tools. So the point I was looking at, when it was privatized in 2013, Yola was sold to the same company that bought Ibadan. PDP strong financier who owns Skybank and owns MTEL. He bought it. When they bought it, they later said they can't run it. Force majeure, that the crisis in the Northeast and all stories, they want to dump it. Even though NEC says no, the network is good, but they dumped it because contracts with federal government and they paid them off. That period they paid them off, Yola started doing better under government ownership than under private sector. So in financial terms, in terms of how much they pay to the market, they were paying more money to the market. When they were the government was subsidizing them because of crisis, but when they started on their own, they were doing better until they left the house. So the point I'm trying to make is that if we had been more reasonable, less ideological about the privatization, we would have structured the market in a way that we take conscience of the weakness, the fact that we don't even have the supply, it has to grow the supply. The fact that even your transmission network is so weak that you can't even evacuate 7,000 megawatts without shutting down. And depending on where they tell you that now they say they have 13, they can do 10,000, but it depends on where the power is. If it's coming from where they don't have strength, they won't take it. So there was a modeling problem, meaning first, diagnosis of the problem, how do you solve it? The second is project management. For example, the federal government started NIPP, a great idea, to generate 10,000, about 7 to 10,000 megawatts in 10 years. So the first wave was 4,000 to 5,000 for the first 5 years, from 2000 to 2005, and 2005 to 2010. If they had executed it very efficiently, it means that by 2010, would have had additional 10,000 power.
To the 2,500.
That one about 6,000, but 2,000 that's available. So if you had 10,000 plus the 6,000, maybe 16,000 available, we won't be talking about power collapse. Because today, with less than 4,000 megawatts, we are coping. So imagine if you have available, easily distributed 16,000 megawatts, bigger deal. So what they didn't do was that, first, they cited these power plants according to political consideration. They didn't take about gas. They are mostly gas-fired power plant. Instead of taking it to the Niger Delta, largely, where you have the gas deposits and the gas network, knowing that the cost of running network for gas is more expensive than the cost of transmission service. So you can actually evacuate everywhere. But to run a network to carry gas with all the brigadage and the vandalization going on. So that project mismanagement means that up to today, we're not even able to get up to 5,000 or 7,000 out of a 10,000 from that plant. So if you model well, if they were not too ideological, too much concerned about private market, because many of them were also bidded for these assets when it was to sell. And in my view, they had complications. They saw the market more from private sector ideology and self-interest. if they were more, wiser like the Egyptians, like the South Africans, who are taking their time to build up to a private market, would have been more successful. Two, if they had executed efficiently, looking at the economics and the technicalities, not just the politics of where to site this power plant, and ensuring that these power plants delivered in 2010, so that by 2010, probably they have a second wave. Today, not just generation, they're also doing distribution and transmission. If they have done all that well, the sector will now be in a position where you can afford to privatize everything. I mean, we cannot talk about the social justice component, but the efficiency will be largely guaranteed that you have the supply to drive it.
Well, thank you. Viewers, we'll take a short break now. We'll be right back.
Trust TV, documenting the Nigerian story.
Viewers, you are welcome to our program. Our guest today is Dr. Sam Amadi, who was chair of the Nigerian Electricity Regulation Commission when the power sector was partly privatized. And so far in the discussion, he has drawn our attention to a number of challenges that created the failure that's the power industry. The modeling, he explains, is wrong, but also the necessary planning and preparation for that transition was not done, and that even the quantity of power available for distribution was simply too small. Dr. Sam Amadi, maybe let's go to a simple question. People wonder, for 20-something years now, we've been saying we will significantly increase the production of power in this country. That has not happened. I remember when I started my column about 11, 12 years ago, I was commenting on this 7,000 megawatts by 2007, etc., etc. None of those things, we are still not at 7,000 megawatts today. And the capacity to carry the load is even smaller than what our generating plants can produce. Why did we find ourselves in this impossibility of significant increase of power supply?
Good question. I think, sometimes we can see the power sector as if it's an island on itself. If you look at other sectors, it is covered at the same malaise, the same problem of running in circle. I think one reason is that we politicize everything, and therefore, all the candidates, this period that I think they're not tempered. Nobody's putting exact figure. Initially, there were those who were talking about 20,000 megawatts when they started. I think both the APC or PDP, I don't know which manifesto first had a figure, something like 20,000, 40,000. Now, the last I saw, the APC manifesto, the last one released, said something like significantly increased. So, so people have been tempered.
Vagueness now is the way out.
Absolutely. So they have learned from the lesson. People talk about 30,000 megawatts by 40,000 megawatts by this. The simple problem is, I think, when we politicize power, before, when we were in government, APC was coming in then, and Fashola, who later became the minister, was talking about in 6 months, a good government should be able to solve this problem. To be fair to him, when he was in Lagos, because I worked together closely with him to set up his power plant, some of the Lagos Island Power. He tried to set up a electricity board, used solar to put light in Oshodi that helped in moving Oshodi from a very hot criminal, hotbed. But I think the first thing that they did not rigorously look at the problem first. As we are talking now, maybe the 4 or 3 leading political parties have not done a serious commission of study. People who have in the past, people in the present, those who are outside, those who have knowledge to sit together and honestly say, what is this problem? And some of this problem may require more than reform in the power sector. I give an example. You have a regulator, NEC. In a regulated market, every decision about investment in that sector must come through the regulator, just like financial market. You just can't talk about setting up a bank or putting X billion. Minister of Finance cannot say they're going to inject, let's say, a subsidy or a stimulus into the financial market to show up investment or loans or lending in the financial market without going to the central bank. But Nigeria, in the power sector, especially worse now, when they did the German deal, NEC didn't know. And I was saying, how can you do that? In fact, no NEC official, top level, traveled to Abakari.
There's a Siemens to fix the power distribution line, yeah.
They went there, Abakari, chief of staff to the president. Not even the minister the minister was just to travel with. They just went with him. NEC, after they finished, they dumped NEC at NEC. When I was there was an instance of when Batnaj requested for 5 billion, I think, to fix AFAM in a cabinet meeting like this, the president and everybody. And I said, no, sir, Mr. President. You can't. I said, there are 2 things. You must do due diligence, what we call prudence and relevance check. First is this investment necessary? Because if you invest, you must recover the money. So assuming you invest and it skyrockets the tariff, and there's basically nothing. The second is prudence. Has it been properly valued that this is what it is? I said, sir, you can't make an investment in a licensed regulated market because government owns the asset without going to a regulator. You have to pass it as a regulator. Want to make this investment, this is what is targeted and this is how to improve the network. And in 10 years' time, this money will be recovered. Therefore, this is the only impact on tariff. The design of electricity market is that you can't put 1 kobo that is not adding this value and will not be recovered. That's why we say, oh, today this sector is totally bankrupt. The amount they're owing is unbelievable. And there's no way of paying it because those investments were not regulated.
Actually, all the companies are bankrupt because they are not able to repay their loans to the banks.
They can't repay the loans, and they're not even able to pay up to 30% of their market. So, for example, in this transaction, if a generator is in this market, the bulk trader backstops him and gives credit support. That means the bulk trader is actually buying the power. So when generators generate power, they're selling to bulk trader who resells literally to the discos to sell. Now, when the discos in a month maybe have a bill of 100%, okay, they're only able to remit 30%. It means that the federal government is holding a debt in control of the market of 70% of that month's transaction. Now, so what that means that if you make this investment, you can't recover it. That's the debt, and the moment you look at the debt overhang of the sector, new investment will not come in because basically this is if they have not paid the 70% of 3 years ago, why am I going to build a new power plant, make any investment in this sector when these debts are still, and it's not like it's a market, debts are okay if the market is moving well, they're settled within a regular time frame, everything is working, it's debts. So when I told this, Jonathan said yes, I said no, sir, I can't do that. And the meeting ended. They still went ahead and made that investment without the regulator. So you can set up a regulator, but you're not running a regulated market. So what we are doing, back to the question you said, why are we going around 7,000, 6,000, is that we are following the form that we have a regulated market, but we're not really playing by the rules. That's what throughout my tenure, I had issue with the minister, quarreling with them. They said I was protecting NEC independence. It's not because of love of power. It's that the logic of the reason the market works is that the market is regulated. So if you're a government coming to say we want to develop this power sector, have you spoken with the regulators, with all the market players to really know what's happening? And I'll give you an example. When this government took over, it took them. First, they took over and said, oh, it's PDP people who are there. So they abandoned the sector, demonized the people. Not only that, people in the sector are people, now having won an election, you are the owner of the sector.
Yeah.
I remember telling the VP that, I said, look, Buhari has, by winning the election, has earned the right to change policy. He has to engage all the people in the sector and say, this is what we want to be done. Ask the experts who are working there, how do people achieve this result for us? They abandoned us, no communication. It took them a long while to even begin to engage the sector. And that's why they struggled, because they
lost time.
Lost time, no knowledge, void. And they brought those Lagos people who are private people, business people, they come and all kinds of nonsensical ideas. Oh,
this category Lagos people, what does that mean?
Lagos people means private sector people. I use the Lagos people because you see, they sit, a private sector man is thinking about making money. Fair, nobody's against it, that's investment. But when you come to how sectors work, you're going to factor the fact that you should be talking. I give an example. There was an instance where I had to ban the CEOs. In the meeting, I said, anybody who goes to see the VP again, without me clearing you, I will sack you from. And I called the VP's assistant, says, how can you be seeing CEOs of a sector without seeing the regulator? So when they come and tell you, Okakambo story, okay, if only government give us 2 point this, we'll fix everything. The reason why we're not delivering, those are lies. So the reason why the government keeps saying 10,000 never do it is that they don't first sit down and ask themselves, what are the bottlenecks, real bottlenecks? You can't reform this power sector without reforming the public sector. So when a minister sits and decides to invest in the network, don't go to the board. The process of the market is that the board will meet and approve and write to the regulator and say, we want to invest this amount of money. We hope to recover it in this year. The regulator will sit with them, do public hearing and say, what's the value? Why should you ask customers to pay more? What are you adding to them? They won't do this. They go to Villa, we talk to the president approves, they borrow the money, they start procuring things. And midway, those things they are procuring don't work. Then after 2 years, that megawatt didn't come. So I think the first solution is to get out of the political high horse and know that this is a technical problem and a commercial problem. And start with talking to the people who know what the problem is and then deciding how you want to solve that problem. Don't just go and craft a narrative, 10,000 megawatts or sufficiently increased power. Like Fashola says, incremental power. And then from incremental, you move to adequate power. We didn't see incremental, we didn't see adequate. So maybe there should be consensus to depoliticize the power sector. Let nobody tell us how many megawatts they will produce anymore. What we want to hear from you is the analysis of the problem and the diagnosis and the interventions you are proposing so that we can sit back, all of us who have some knowledge of the sector, and examine and say, yes, there's a gas challenge. This solution will work. There is a transmission problem. There's a financing problem. In fact, the biggest problem in this sector now is how do you finance? Because if you're using private money, they want quick return. There's a misalignment between the tenure of the money they're going to borrow and the normal sector requirement. Maybe you need to have a 10-year plan to recover the money. And I've been the view that government should, in a way, socialize those losses. Make up their mind that they're going to make some interventions through disciplined public intervention, not expecting the market that's struggling, market that's no depth in the market, in the private. Apart from Dangote, there are a few companies, and Dangote will not come to a regulated market anyway. Apart from those guys, few companies have the capacity to finance.
But let me look at one issue We've heard a lot about the problems at the level of government, at the level of politics. But the ordinary Nigerian consumer, he doesn't want to pay his electricity bill. Isn't that a problem? What can you do about that?
It's a big problem. And again, as if we are blaming government, when they started this sector, when Jonathan came and rolled out this big presidential roadmap, before I took over power, when I was appointed, I did a memo to Batinaj. They were doing the business.
Who was the Minister
of Power, Batinaj, Professor Batinaj. Now that they're doing their business, they had a kind of town hall for investors. So I proposed to myself, Oga, while we are dealing with the business entrepreneurs, let's do with the citizens. Let's do town halls for citizens to begin to reorient them to the nature of this new market. So the point is, of course, it was discounted. So this market-oriented sense makes them understand that not only that change cannot work without sufficient public support. We should have started a lot of work with civil society groups. In fact, what I did was I arranged at the level of NEC. We arranged what we call park consumer assemblies, which Lukman Salusi helped us to coordinate across the country. But it's weak and small scale. It has to be the same way we brought all the investors. It's supposed to bring. So the idea is people need to know that they have to be paying bills now. In fact, before you privatize, and this is important, when you privatize, the tendency for people to feel they're cheated for any increase in power is higher. It's a perception issue. So Jibo has bought the 10, and Jibo is milking us. But when it's publicly owned, the perception of exploitation is lower because it's for public sector, government, so all is being equal. It's not like one MD is taking the money. That is why whenever there's any increase of tariff in any privately privatized company, that's outcry more than national. So by the time you are corporatized, it's time to start building that confidence in the consumers. You increase price, you improve quality of service, you do a lot of communication. So by the time you are privatizing, the people have also got the sense that this is now a user fee-based sector. They already start paying their bills, and then exercising the right of customers, complaining, getting complaints solved. So you build confidence and change management strategy. It works. People now know that, look, power is not like water we are still flushing anyhow we like, We open a tap, we flush. Maybe those of us who are lucky, you get a small bill for a water corporation. That power is now the equivalent of going to the filling station to buy fuel. If you waste it, if you travel more than you are supposed to, if your car is leaking,
you have to pay
more. So once you internalize that messaging and people now see the value, they're getting better. Like those who don't have light get cut off. And then maybe you provide meter. Everybody can conserve their power. You factor that loss, that inefficiency in the other aspect. If you do that, then consumers will come to the fact that yes, they should be they're paying, and they're seeing incremental improvement in service, and they're seeing accountability. So when you now privatize and sell to a private person, they have already formed a culture of paying their bills, and they have a culture of demanding for service. So that quick transition we did from no payment of bill, energy theft, suddenly we think that once private owners get on board, people have that mental. That's part of why I said we didn't allow the process to go through. We could have continued with public ownership, but focus on commercializing it so that people pay for what they consume and the system delivers to people what they pay for. Corporatize it so that you're able to know when they're stealing the money. It's not a case of MDs do whatever they like, they appoint them. So what we are paying, GDP, is the price of our willingness to change our public sector. Because interestingly, before we privatize, they are appointing their cronies, they don't care. When I was in NEC, the first thing I did was to ban what they call meter maintenance fee. Meter maintenance fee was just a fiction they created to say they want to raise money for meter. And people don't have meter and they're paying maintenance fee. So when I banned it, I said, it's illogical, it's criminal. One of the CEO called me and said, Oga, this is where we get money that we used to give ministers and when they come for visit. So he now called me and said, the minister says it has not been banned. So I told him, I said, me and the minister, you tell me who regulates the sector. If you charge that, I will report to EFCC. And that's how it ended meter maintenance fee. But the point is, if there's courage to reform the public sector ownership, then they would have built up efficiency both for customer end and supply end, demand end, supply end. Then by the time you are transitioning to private sector because you don't have the money, you want to free your money for healthcare, for other things, then you have a sector where there's existing compact between the consumer. They know that service works, they have to pay. So you don't put too much problem on the private sector. Now, the private sector takes the
Dr.
sector.
Amadi, we just have 3 minutes left. We are heading for elections. There'll be a new government. What are the steps the new government should take to address this crisis in the power sector correctly?
One, I think they should consider to bring back a presidential task force on power, like the way Jonathan and Batonage did. That was a good thing to do. Why it works that some of the problems we have are low-hanging fruits. Some are slippages, bureaucratic inefficiency. For example, there are 50 meters. Now, rain is ending, so you'll be able to predict seasonal shortfalls with the kanji, with the hydro. What that means is that you're going to have a drop. So if that happens, what should you do? So you should have planned by now. Somebody's job is to plan and make procurement, improve gas supply to power plants. With a tax force, they can do those tracking and deal with tax owners to deliver. So you can mop up 300 megawatts every day through just not any new investment, not any new policy, but simply tracking things well. Yeah. So I would argue for some kind of task force, but appointed based on competence and character, not another job for politicians, if that is possible. The second thing is that the government that comes in, even before they come in, should set up a non-partisan group of experts to sit back and do a holistic review. The National Electric Power Policy, NEP, that underwrites this sector, was done in 2021. That is close to 15 years, more than 50 years. 2000 to 2022 is about 22 years. That policy is in dire need of review. The global economy has changed. The ideological environment in which it was crafted has changed. The market, global market has changed. You need a serious team sit together and review that and create a new adapt, amend policy. I think that's important. The third thing I think has to happen is that they should reauthorize the regulator. Look for maybe more competent persons to head the place if they can find. But what the regulator should do is to subject the market to an industry review to say which operator, instead of political risk, okay, we'll sack this, we take back our asset, you benchmark them for 6 months. And that 6 months, if they fail, the market will throw them, dilute their ownership, bring institutional investors to replace them. Now, what that does for you is that we know that many of these actors cannot perform, but you can't arbitrarily sort them out. You have to use a market-based process to take them out so that all the investors out there will look at the market and see that regularity and certainty. They see that, look, these people have been exited out, just like we did the banking reform. You didn't take the license. You set up a standard. A bank must have 300 million in asset before they can
continue in
business. Those people are forced to merge. Those who can't, the other people bought them over and it works. So I think that's what it needs to be done. That somewhere along the line, not all these guys can improve. Not all of them have the capacity, the managerial experience to deliver. But the only way to do that is to set out a clear benchmark for 6 months, give everybody opportunity to meet up those commitments. Those who don't meet up the commitments will be, by then you are filing beside them. Those who take over, institutional players likely, that means people who are running similar power plants, doing well in comparable countries, whether it's Egypt, whether it's Algeria, Tunisia, Chile, or South Africa. I think that's the 3 steps. So to rehash, set up a task force of people who are competent and have the character to look at the sector and look at how to deal with some of these slippages that can account for 30% of the inefficiency. Second, review the entire power sector reform policy. And thirdly, set up the regulator with a benchmark to assess operators and exit through market processes those who have the capacity and bring in those who can drive the new policy that will come from the review of the roadmap?
Well, ladies and gentlemen watching us, I think it will be good if the 18 presidential candidates watch this program so that they'll have ideas on what they can do about the power sector when one of them becomes president in May next year. We've had a fascinating discussion on regulation and the crisis of the power sector. And a lot of the crisis in that sector has been due to poor planning. It has been due to the inability to create the right model that will work for our situation. And of course, at the level of implementation, excessive number of interferences that created difficulty. Dr. Sam Amadi, thank you so much for coming. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much.